Prepare for a Rood awakening.
Shalom, Torah fans. This is Michael Rood in Jerusalem, and I am standing in one of my favorite teaching places in all of the land of Israel. I am standing in the mouth of a Tammuz cave, which is overlooking the Hinnom Valley, or the Valley of Gehenna, and I am facing to the east at the time of the winter solstice. This is the very birthday of Tammuz, who was worshipped here by the Canaanites, who brought all of their pagan sun god worship from the land of Babylon into this parcel of land that was promised to the sons of Shem. In this particular cave, on this time of year, at the time of the winter solstice, they actually did their child sacrifice, or their child mass, which means mass means sacrifice. And it was in this very location that we learn that the Canaanites had brought something into this land that the Israelites were not to learn anything about and have nothing to do. As the Almighty told Israel when they left Egypt and before they came into the land, he said, "Do not learn the way of the heathen. Do not learn how they worship and serve their gods, and do the same thing as if you're doing it for me, because it is an abomination. It is utterly detestable, repulsive, putrid, and vile. I want you to do nothing and know nothing about the way that they serve their gods, because the way that I want to be served," the Almighty said, "is according to the commandments that I give you, according to the feast of the Lord, and according to the temple service." And it was right across this valley, over on the Temple Mount, that the priests of Israel were to conduct the worship service for the nation of Israel, and that is where the true God made his abode and where he wanted to be worshiped in spirit and in truth. We read about the Tammuz cave and about the worship of Tammuz in Ezekiel chapter 8. When we speak of Tammuz in the Western world, and when people read Ezekiel 8 in the Western world, they are, for the most part, absolutely clueless what they are reading. But here in the land of Israel, and in this part of the world, this is basic common knowledge. Everyone in this area knows about this Tammuz cave. They know what was conducted here. They know the way of the heathen. They know about the worship service at the birthday of Tammuz on the pagan calendar. It was at the time of the winter solstice, but we have to remember that at the time that this worship service was put in place, it was on Tammuz's birthday, which back before the precession of the equinoxes, it was on actually December 25th, which is the birthday of Tammuz. But here in the land of Israel, we are going to set this context for you, because it says in Ezekiel 8, that there were priests, Kohanim, in the temple who had their back to the temple. They were facing the sun and they were worshiping the sun. And there was even a greater abomination that was going on, and that was women in the temple weeping for Tammuz. Now, what I would like to do is give you a little bit of background on these things because of the significance of the worship that got into Israel through the Levites and the Kohanim, through all the people of Israel, and they became so polluted that that is why judgment came upon the entire nation of Israel. First, the 10 northern tribes were taken into captivity because of their adaptation and acceptance of pagan sun god worship that was brought in by the Canaanites. And then finally, Judah got into this very same thing. In Ezekiel, in the 9th chapter, Ezekiel saw by revelation the Spirit of Yahweh leave from over the Ark of the Covenant and stand in the doorway of the temple, where the voice of Yah cried out to the angels that were standing across the doorway, and he told one of the angels who had an inkhorn to go out and mark the foreheads of everyone in the nation of Israel who was crying out against the abominations that were being committed by Israel. After that angel completed his job, he came back. everyone was marked. Then the voice spoke out from the cloud of glory, "Angels, take your slaughtering instruments and go out and slaughter every man, woman, and child, beginning at the temple. Don't spare a soul, but don't you dare touch one who has the inkhorn angel mark on their forehead, because they are the ones who have been crying out against these abominations." Now, to fully understand the abominations that Israel was involved in, I need to take you back to the land of Shinar, where the Canaanite sun god worship all began. And in the ancient land of Shinar, we go back to the time of Noah and Noah's son Ham. It says that Ham had a son, and his youngest son's name was Canaan. And Canaan was involved in a situation with Noah in which Noah said, Canaan is cursed. Canaan is going to be a servant of Shem and Japheth. Now, we see what happened with Canaan. His grandson was Nimrod. Everyone in this part of the world knows who Nimrod is. Most of the people in the West have heard of Nimrod. But Nimrod established a one-world government, a political, economic, and religious system in the plain of Shinar, in which he was worshipped as a god. Now, to end this god worship of Nimrod, according to some of the ancient records, it was Shem, Noah's oldest son, that slaughtered Nimrod and strewn his body part throughout the land of Shinar, which should have effectively ended the worship of Nimrod. But Nimrod's wife Semiramis, not willing to let the kingdom slip through her fingers so easily as that, said that Nimrod really didn't die. Nimrod ascended up into heaven and has become the sun. And from that, the priest, the knowledgeable priest among the Babylonians, among the worship of Nimrod, they put in place a sun calendar. The Babylonians were the ones that divided up the year into 4 quadrants. The winter solstice, which was the rebirth of the sun, which we'll get into in a minute. The summer solstice, which is the longest day of the year, on the absolute opposite end of the solar calendar, and the vernal and the autumnal equinox. And these things were put in place as the development of Babylonian sun god worship was brought into its fullness. And in fact, the Babylonian sun calendar is still in use all over the world, because the Romans adapted it through Julius Caesar, the Julian calendar, and then later it was adopted and updated by Pope Gregory, the Gregorian calendar. But it is basically the Babylonian sun god worship calendar. Now, what happened when Nimrod ascended up into heaven? Quite a while later, his wife Semiramis became pregnant, but not in a way that you would expect. No, her explanation was her husband, Nimrod, impregnated her with the rays of the sun, and she brought forth the reincarnated Nimrod as Tammuz, and his birthday on the ancient Babylonian calendar, December 25th, the time of the winter solstice. That is the shortest day of the year, by the way, and that is when the sun begins its ascension, and there you have a link to the entire pagan sun god worship calendar and festivals that originated in the land of Shinar. Now, what happened with the reincarnated Nimrod as Tammuz, born on December 25th? You would expect that Tammuz would live forever, but such was not the case. Tammuz was killed in a freak hunting accident when he was gored to death by a wild boar. And so the worshipers of Tammuz then set aside 40 days of weeping for Tammuz, because it was in the 40th year of his life that he was killed. So they set aside the 40 days of weeping for Tammuz, in which the sun god worshipers would deny themselves a pleasure in this life for the pleasure of Tammuz in his afterlife. Quite a while later, Semiramis, his mother, died. And she was so venerated that the story goes that she ascended up into heaven, and the gods returned her to earth on the first Sunday. That's when the sun god worshipers worship their sun god, Nimrod and Tammuz. And on the first Sunday after the vernal equinox, That is when Semiramis was returned to earth in this giant egg, which landed in the Euphrates River. It cracked open, and out emerged Semiramis reincarnated as Easter, the bare-breasted goddess of fertility and sexual desire, who came out of that egg and turned a bird into an egg-laying rabbit in order to proclaim her divinity. Now, at that point, the 40 days of weeping for Tammuz were stacked up in front of the day in which his mother was reincarnated as Easter, the Queen of Heaven. And so you have the 40 days of weeping for Tammuz, which is now called Lent in America at least. And then on Easter Sunday, when Semiramis was reincarnated as the pagan sex goddess, that is when they killed the wild boar that killed Tammuz, and that's why everyone ate ham on Easter Sunday as a completion of the sun god worship festival of Easter. Now, of course, in the West, people use the word Easter as if it has something to do with the Bible. Has nothing to do with the Bible. This is pure pagan sun god worship. And in this cave, on December 25th, or as the winter solstice moved back through the period of time, this is where they had the child mass. Mass meaning sacrifice. They sacrificed infant babies here in this cave at the time of the child mass. Now it's called Christ Mass. I guess it's been changed a little bit somehow, but it is all Babylonian sun god worship that I'm explaining. Now, what happens with at the time of the reincarnation of Easter, then what we have are the pagan priest, the Canaanite priest, who would impregnate virgins on the altar of Easter right here in this cave, and then a year later, when those babies are 3-month-old, they sacrifice those 3-month-old infants, and then they would dye the eggs of Easter in the blood of sacrificed infants. The amazing thing is, to this very day, we can walk down this valley up into Jaffa Gate into one denomination's building on Easter Sunday, and they will have the eggs of Easter dyed one color, and one color only, blood red. If you ask the parishioners sitting in the pews why it's blood red, they have no idea, but it goes right back to what took place in this cave. This is what Israel adopted and were taken into captivity by Shalmaneser. These are some of the practices that Judah took into their bosom and became a part of their worship life, and they were taken captivity into Babylon. Now, as I have described all this, it's important to understand that after the Babylonian worship cycle was all put in place, that is when the Almighty knew that there was no amount of evil that would be able to be taken, that would be withheld from these people. And so he decided to confuse the languages, and at that point, he spread these people out by different languages all over the earth. And that is why, even to this very day, you see that Jupiter, the Greek sun god, was born on December 25th. You see Ra, the Egyptian sun god, was born on December 25th. You see that Mithra, the Roman sun god, that's who Constantine worshiped, he was born on December 25th. Now, how can all this be? How is it that the worship of Easter is even found in remote areas such as China and Russia, Japan, America?